수피아님, 오세요. 다시 오세요. 안녕하세요. 아까 인터넷이 안 좋아서 끊겼는데, 그냥 하려니 아쉬워서, 예, 파월 연준 의장의 하원 청문회 그래도 조금 보고 가야겠죠. 예. 자, 맥스님 안녕하시고요. 산어르님 안녕하시고, 예, 다시 들어오셨죠. 아, 지상선 팀원이 아니에요. 아까 인터넷이 끊겨가지고 모두 예, 방폭이 됐는데 예, 그냥 가려니 아쉬워서 다시 들어왔습니다. 예. 9분 있다가 연준 의장이 이제 증언을 해요. 하원에서 어제 상원에 이어서 2차적으로. 그래서 이거는 조금 앞에는 좀 보고 가는 게 좋지 않을까 싶어서요. 예. 자, 샤이님 안녕하시고요. 이제 자기님 어여오세요. 안녕하시고요. 예. 이거 보고 가겠습니다, 오늘. 네, 철저하게 그냥 동시통역만 하고 가겠습니다. 9분 정도 남았는데, 예, 벨라님 안녕하세요. 다시 들어오셨네요. 예. 아이고, 지상석 팀님, 어우, 축하드려요. 예, 박사 통과했네. 이제 박사님이네, 지박사님. 축하드려요. 예, 축하드리고요. 예. 자, 그렇고, 예. 꺼야겠다. 예, 지금, 뭐, 미국 시장은, 뭐, 이렇네요. 예. 제시카님 안녕하세요. 예, 다시 만들었어요. 예, 그냥 가기 아쉬워서 잠도 안 오고, 요거는 좀 보고 가는 게 낫지 않을까 싶어가지고, 예, 어, 예. 자, 그렇고, 마우스가 잘 안 움직이긴 하네요. 제가 마우스가 잘 움직여야 되는데, 마우스가 안 눌러지네. 네, 그렇고, 자, 예, 축하드리고요. 예. 오늘 일단은 뭐 시장은 뭐 예, 나스닥이 조금 빠졌네요. 다시 예, 러셀 2000 좀 빠졌고 예, 오늘 뭐 예, 자 오늘 약간 선물 시장이 좀 안 좋았었는 좀 좋았었는데 좀 빠졌습니다. 예, 뭐 그래도 가치주는 좀 버티고 있습니다. S&P 500하고 다우는 예. 예, 다시 방 만들었습니다. 예, 다시 방 만들었고요. 예, 8분 정도 있다가 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 예, 지금 예, 마우스가 잘 안 움직이긴 하는데 저 오늘 예, 마우스가 안 눌러지죠. 자, 오늘 많이도 와 계시고요. 자, 오늘은 그냥 이것만 보겠습니다. 예. 예, 오늘 테슬라 아까 조금 악재에 나왔다고 얘기 드렸는데, 자, 7월 둘째 주, 2주 정도, 예, 생산 중단한 게 좀 영향을 미칠 것 같긴 해요. 예. 예. 예, 힘들었어요. 꽤 오래 걸렸어요. 예. 작년부터 거의 1년 동안 고생하셨죠. 예. 자, 샤이님 안녕하시고요. 예. 자, 오늘 뭐 요거 동시 통역하고 가겠습니다. 뭐 제가 통역을 잘하는 건 아니겠지만 제가 들으면서 바로바로 말을 하기 때문에 잘 뭐 이제 5분 더 남았어요. 한 6분 정도 있다가 시작할 텐데 이제 들으면서 말하기 때문에 말하면은 또 예, 말하는 거를 제가 말을 하면은 파월 연준이장이 말하는 걸 못 들을 때가 있습니다. 예. 뭐 타자를 치기도 하는데 타자가 친다고 뭐 그게 또 빨리 할 수 있는 것도 아니고 말하는 게 더 빠르죠. 종합적으로 전체적으로 말하는 걸 예, 간략하게 요약해서 말하는 게 더 낫죠. 해석도 좀 해드리고 그죠. 자, 솔라솔라님 안녕하시고요. 예. 자, 오늘 아까 방이 폭파됐어요. 인터넷이 끊겨가지고 방이 사라졌어요. 1시간 반 동안 라방을 했는데 잠깐 예, 쉬고 예, 다시 이렇게 또 시작합니다. 5분 정도 있다가 시작할게요. 예, 5분 남았습니다. 5분 정도 있다가 동시통역을 해드리겠습니다. 오늘 순수하게 이것만 보여드릴게요. 투더무님 안녕하시고요. 예. 오늘 시장이 예, 좋았다 안 좋았다 그렇긴 한데, 자 채권을 좀 봤으면 좋겠는데 인터넷이 잘 안 뜨네요. 예. 오늘 뭐 인터넷 자 오늘 시장에 마우스가 잘 안 눌러져요 오늘. 예, 왜 그런지 모르겠네. 껐다 켜야 되나 이게. 예, 오늘 마우스가 잘 안 눌러집니다. 예, 제 핸드폰으로 보는 게 나을 것 같아요. 예. 자, 지금 선물시장, 지금 이제 주식시장 시작됐는데요. 빅스지수가 좀 올라가네요. 29.33으로 올라가고, 달러도 좀 올라가고, 예. 나스닥은 조금 빠졌는데 약보합인데 그래도 S&P 500하고 다우는 좀 올라가 있어요. 예. 유럽 쪽이 좀 많이 빠졌네. 자, 그렇고. 예, 무선 마우스면 배터리가 다 돼서 그럴 수 있구나. 알겠습니다. 예. 예, 마우스가 좀 이상한데 한쪽으로 자꾸 치우쳐요. 자, 시브이나님 오셨네요. 안녕하시고요. 오시고요. 예, 오세요. 예. 예. 자, 라이브 스트리밍, 예, 지금 와 계시고요. 예, 지금 이제 4분 정도 있으면은 동시통역 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 이제, 제가 전문 통역사는 아니기 때문에, 예, 뭐 이렇게 요약해서 얘기를 드립니다. 또 제가 말하는 동안에 이렇게 목소리가 파월년 중에 말하는 게 좀 끊길 수도 있어요. 예, 이해하시고요. 예, 해나님 오시고요. 예. 아까 1시간 반 정도 라방 했습니다. 예, 저 오늘 뭐 소식은 거기서 다 전해드렸고요. 그거 참고하시기 바랍니다. 자, 앞에 방송 참고하시고요. 자, 이거는 순수하게 오늘 동시통역만 같이 보도록 하겠습니다. 그러니까 방송, 자, 파월 연준위장의 하원, 자, 연설만 보도록 하겠습니다. 예. 제 얼굴 잘 보이시죠? 자. 자, 오늘 자 일단은 주식시장 잘 올라가네요. 예, 잘 올라가고, 자 오늘 자 본드 채권은 아까만큼 떨어져 있네요. 10년물이 3.07까지 떨어졌네. 2년물이 2.92까지 떨어졌네요. 와. 자, 지금 채권이 엄청나게 떨어졌습니다. 지금 10년물이 3.07까지 떨어져 있어요. 예, 2년물은 2.92까지 떨어졌고, 이러면은 뭐 괜찮죠. 이러면은 네, 뭐 아무튼 나스닥 다시 반전을 했습니다. 예. 파월시도 3위, 이게 6개월에 한 번씩 하는 거기 때문에, 자, 주식이 뭐가 이렇게 많이 빠지나 본데, 자, 니오가 조금 예, 니오 왜요? 예, 니오 지금 올라가고 있는데, 자, 니오 올라갔는데 왜, 니오 올라가고 있는데, 자, 테슬라는 좀 빠졌네요. 예, 2% 정도 빠졌고, 애플은 올라가 있고, 예, 아마존 올라가 있고, 예. 자, 니오 아직 플러스인데 왜, 자, 니오 아직 플러스인데 왜, 예, 잘 하고 있는데, 자, 그렇습니다. 예. 자, 오늘 볼까요? 방이 예, 방이 아까 인터넷이 끊겨서 새로 만들었습니다. 예, 방 새로 만들었고요. 지금 예, 뭐 인텔리아는 오르고, 뭐 에큐레이는 오르고, 예, 떨어지는 거 있고. 자, 일단 요거 같이 보겠습니다. 오늘 예, 다시 돌아왔네요. 졸리님 안녕하시고요. 지금 예, 동시통역, 예, 오늘은 요 방송은 아까 방송 이제 주식 시황이랑, 자, 1시간 반 정도 다 알려드렸고요. 자, 오늘 소식은 다 알려드렸고, 이 방송은 순수하게 파월 연준위장의 하원 청문회 증언을 예, 같이 보는 시간을 가지도록 하겠습니다. 자, 이제 1분 남았고요. 곧 시작합니다. 통역이 약간 서툴어도 이해하시고요. 대체적으로 요약해서 예, 설명을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 해석도 좀 곁들이고요. 자, 요약해서 드리고요. 제가 말할 때 파월 연준장이 또 말하면 조금 못 듣는 부분도 있기 때문에 그런 건 이해하시고요. 예. 자, 지금 일단은 이제 주식시장은 다 잘 올라가고 있습니다. 양전했고요. 예. 푸른 하늘님, 예, 다시 했습니다. 그래도 그냥 가기 아쉬워서 다시 왔습니다. 예. 자, 저도 다시 열려서 잽싸게 애들 재우고 왔어요. 솔라솔라님. 자, 케빈님 오시고요. 안녕하세요. 예, 이제 곧 시작합니다. 예. 예, 지금 기다리는데 아직 시작은 안 하고 있습니다. 예. 자, 지금 기다리고 있고요. 예. CNBC에서 자, 이제 보여주려나 봅니다. 자, 푸른하늘님, 예, 오셨고. 자, 오늘 또, 예, 많이들 오실려나 모르겠네요. 자, 일단은, 자, 조금 보다 자야죠. 예, 아직 잠이 안 와요. 그죠? 자, 예, 예, 아니, 잠이 안 오죠. 자려고 그랬더니. 자, 아직 시작 안 합니다. 예, 시작할 것 같은데, 아직 시작 안 하네요. 근데 마우스가 참, 잘 되면 좋은데 마우스가 잘 안 되네. 예. 자, 이게 시작할 것 같은데, 자, 아직 시작 안 하고 있습니다. 잠 안 오세요, 다들? 어, 예, 예, 뭐 시작 기다리고 있습니다. 지금, 예, 하네요. 자, 하원입니다. 혹시 모르니까 영어 자막도 틀어 놓겠습니다. 예, 악수하네요. 인사하고 있네. 아직 시작 안 했네. 원래 이 상원이든 하원이든 국회 히어링 가면 되게 지루해요. 그래서 제가 웬만하면 안 보려고 그러는데 지루하지만 잘 하길 바랍니다. 하원 의원들의 임기는 2년이에요. 예, 상원보다는 좀 파워가 없죠. 혁불리 몽구리님 안녕하시고요. 예, 의장이 졌습니다.
The chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Before we get started with today's hearing, I would also like to ask unanimous request to adopt this resolution that was made available to all members that names our newest committee member, Mr. Norman, to his subcommittee assignments. Without objection, it is so ordered.
예, 새로운 사람을 임명하는 거 승인하기로 했는데 뭐 이런 건 중요하지 않고요. 파월 연준의장 말할 때만 통역하도록 하겠습니다.
Monetary policy and the state of the economy. I now recognize myself for 4 minutes to give an opening statement. Welcome back, Chair Powell.
제롬 파월 환영합니다.
And congratulations on your confirmation
환영합니다.
as chair of the Fed.
연임을
Since you
축하합니다.
last came before the committee, Americans continue to struggle to make ends meet as the price of housing, gas, and groceries have skyrocketed. While it is important for the Fed to fight inflation, I would caution against any approach.
왜 멈췄지? 멈췄어요. 왜 그래? 갑자기 멈췄어요. 제발. 왜 그러죠? 야호가 더 잘 나와요. CNBC가 갑자기 멈췄는데? 나오네요.
Out of control housing prices. But without action by Congress, inflationary pressures will remain because there is simply not enough affordable housing being built, and there won't be until Congress makes necessary investments. That's why it's so important that we pass the housing title of the Build Back Better Act, which provides over $150 billion towards new housing construction, modernizing existing structures for the long term, and providing supports to people.
빌드백 베러 법을 만들어 가지고 여러 가지 것들을 통과하려고 합니다.
Corporate consolidation and greed. Without healthy competition to drive down prices, mega corporations driven by profit are exploiting their economic power to squeeze Americans to the breaking point. Democrats in Congress put forth solutions to tackle inflation. But my colleagues
인플레이션을 해결하기 위해서
have
모였다고 합니다.
consistently voted against every solution. Let me go over some examples. Democrats passed a bill with $28 million in funding.
민주당이 2,800만 불짜리 했고 여태까지 계속해서 법안을 만들어서 통과시키면서 경제 문제를 해결하려고 했다고 합니다. 근데 이거는 다 통역할 필요가 없을 것 같아요. 이따가 파월 연준의장이 말할 때만 통역하도록 하겠습니다. 예.
Let's also not forget that the Federal Reserve has more duties beyond monetary policy, bank mergers and banking desert access to credit for low-income consumers and communities of color.
네, 여러 가지 여태까지 하원에서 이 위원회에서 어떤 일을 했다는 거 이런 거를 지금 얘기하고 있습니다.
The Federal Reserve must work with other regulators to properly oversee the cryptocurrency market and provide guidance on a more stable alternative to volatile cryptocurrencies. Lastly, the confirmations of Lisa Cook, Susan Collins, and Philip Jefferson are historic, but more must be done to ensure diversity at the Federal Reserve. So, Chair Powell, I look forward to hearing your testimony this morning.
자, 오늘 증언을 듣겠습니다.
Ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, for 4 minutes to give an opening statement. And for those who may have, please get muted so that Mr. McHenry can give his statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for being back with us. A year ago, President Biden tried to buy support by signing into law a $2 trillion stimulus bill.
예, 바이든이 3,000만 불짜리 통과시켰다.
Ordinary Americans who are now repaying all that quote-unquote free money.
우리가 그 많은 돈에 대한 지금 세금을 제공하고 돈을 내고 있다.
Summer vacations because they can't afford a $5 a gallon price at the pumps.
지금 기름값이 5불이다.
Out of control for everything from housing and food to airfare, cars, medical care, and clothing. Democrats are still on the hunt for the scapegoat. They blamed oil companies, the war in Ukraine, and supply chain issues.
민주당은 지금 정유회사라든지 우크라이나인지 중국을 지금 비난하고 있다 이런 것들에 대해서.
That resulted in higher grocery bills and soaring gas prices. President Biden continues to deny that the so-called American Rescue Plan contributed to inflation.
바이든 대통령은 이 레스큐 플랜 지난번에 통과시킨 그 돈이 이렇게 인플레이션을 가져왔다는 걸 계속 부인하고 있다.
From former Clinton Treasury Secretary Larry Summers to Jason Furman to Michael Strahan, don't think it's bizarre.
레리 서머스부터 해서 많은 사람들이 이게 너무 이상하다고 얘기하고 있다.
So now millions of Americans need to be rescued from the Democrats' American Rescue Plan.
민주당은 계속해서 비난하고 있습니다.
Chair Powell is taking this
인플레이션 올라간 거에 대해서.
seriously. And as I've said many times before, I think he's the right man for the job, and he is. But how the Fed manages the next few months will be as critical as any period during the last 4 decades.
연준한테 다음 몇 달이 굉장히 중요하다.
Prepared for prices rising at a clip of 8%, with even core inflation rising and running at 6% now. Republicans
근원 물가가 6%까지 올라가고
about the
있다.
size of the Fed's balance sheet, but it grew by nearly $1 trillion over the last 12
밸런스
months alone.
시트요 대체대표도 축소시켰다.
And now it seems the previous prediction markets committee about economic projections are wrong, and they are altering course.
경제 전망이 틀렸다.
Simply put, the Fed has its work cut out for it. Lastly, I want to address the left's ongoing efforts to expand the Fed's dual mandate. Republicans have been on the record opposing this, and I hope that the skyrocketing inflation unleashed under the Biden administration puts an end to these discussions. The Fed should be focused on price stability. That should be their single-minded focus at this moment in time. It's out of touch for Democrats to keep pushing mission creep at the Fed when American families are struggling to feed themselves and to get work.
미국 사람들 되게 힘들어하고 있다. 물가가 올라서.
It needs to focus on the middle class, not the chirping political class. This was true before inflation broke out. It's
정치적인 것보다도 중산층을 계속 봐줘야 된다.
I hope that Chair Powell will deliver that message to his colleagues throughout the institution. And again, I want to thank Chair Powell for his testimony. Thanks for his willingness to engage with
증언해줘서 감사하다. 여기 나와줘서
and
감사하다.
thank you for his openness in what has been a more closed-off institution. We have a mess to clean up, and we know that you're taking your job seriously. I'm glad you're taking your job
이제
seriously.
청소를 해야 될 때다.
And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member McHenry. I now recognize the chair of the subcommittee on National Security, International Development, and Monetary Policy, the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, for 1 minute to give an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome,
돌아가면서
Chairman
오프닝
Powell.
스테이먼트를 1분씩 하고
Congratulations on your
있습니다.
confirmation. I don't remember a moment as consequential as this one for the Federal Reserve or as potentially testing of its leadership. I think I have to go back to the end of 2008 and the first quarter of 2009 to think of a moment that was quite as important as Americans watched the economy collapse around their ears
2008년, 2009년으로
and
돌아가 봐야
their jobs and
된다.
assets being lost. There is a very real possibility that Americans will be caught in a vice, an economic vice, not of their own making, between inflation, which makes their everyday lives unaffordable, and the possibility, much contemplated by economists, of a recession. Simply put, as one of the last members of Congress to get out of the chamber when it was under attack on January 6, 2021, I don't believe that our democracy can either runaway inflation or another recession.
지금 민주주의가 지금 인플레이션 때문에 잘 살아남을 것 같지 않다.
Much of this rests on your shoulders. So Chairman
이
Powell,
모든
I
게
just
너한테
ask that as you
달렸다.
make your decisions, you think not just of the numbers and the economics, but of the importance of sustaining this nation's democracy.
Thank you, Mr.
이
Himes.
나라의
I now
민주주의는
recognize
네가
the
지금
right subcommittee
잡느냐 안
on
잡느냐에
National
달려 있다 이렇게
Security,
얘기하고 있습니다.
International Development and Monetary Policy, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, for 1 minute to give an opening statement.
As we face the worst inflation the country has seen in 4 decades, I am encouraged to have Mr. Powell leading our central bank.
인플레이션은
and I'm hopeful
정말
the Fed will
40년
rise
만에
to the
가장
occasion. At the
최악이다
same time,
지금.
it's important to remember the following. Just last inflation warnings to pass a $2 trillion stimulus bill. They were pushing the Fed to solve climate change and social ills, and they
2,000조짜리
flirted
법안을
with
통과시켜가지고
unconventional monetary
지금
tool yield curve
민주당이
control. Today, as
인플레이션을
gas prices
초래했다.
top $5 a gallon, these left-wing ideas seem like a fever dream from an alternative universe. But many Democrats fell for them at the time, and they'll likely pursue them again if inflation subsides. The lesson for the Fed is clear. It needs to focus on doing a limited number of jobs well and not get distracted by those who want it to be all things to all people. Specifically, the
기후
Fed should be
변화라든지
laser-focused on its price stability
지금 뭐
mandates,
다른
and
세계
even
얘기할
as we
때가
acknowledge
아니다
the risk of
지금.
recession, and as everyone desires a
지금
soft
그냥
landing, I encourage the
공화당
Fed to have
사람들이
fortitude
민주당을 계속
to
그냥
prioritize
비난하는
defeating
그런
this inflation
얘기입니다.
scourge.
예.
Chair Powell, I hope you are hammering this message home at the Fed as ordinary Americans see their paychecks eaten away under Democrat mismanagement of our economy.
I want to welcome today's distinguished witness, the Honorable Jerome Powell, Chair of the Board of
지금 방송
Governors
잘
of the
보이시나요?
Federal Reserve System. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. Chair Powell, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to present your oral testimony.
Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, and other members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to present the Federal Reserve's semi-annual monetary policy report. And I'll begin with one overarching message. At the Fed, we understand the hardship that high inflation is causing.
예,
We
지금
are strongly
인플레이션
committed to bringing
때문에
inflation
고통을 많이
back down,
겪고
and
있다.
we're moving expeditiously to do so.
우린
We have
빨리빨리
both the
앞으로
tools we
나가려고
need
하고
and the
있다.
resolve it will take to restore price stability on behalf
우리
of
가격
American families
안정을
and
취하려고
businesses.
노력하고 있다.
It is essential that we bring inflation down if we are to have a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all.
네, 어제 했던
I
얘기
will review
그대로 다시
the
하는 것
current
같아요.
economic situation
예.
before turning to monetary policy. Inflation remains well above our longer-run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending
인플레이션이
in
지금
April,
우리 장기
total
목표인
PCE
2%
prices
이상
rose
유지하고 있다.
6.3%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.9%. The available data for May suggests that the core measure likely held at that pace or eased slightly last month. Aggregate demand is strong. Supply constraints have been larger and longer lasting than anticipated.
어제
and price
상원에서
pressures have spread
발표한
to
거
a
그대로
broad
얘기하는
range
것
of
같아요.
goods and services. Prices of crude oil and other commodities that resulted from Russia's invasion of Ukraine is boosting prices for gasoline and fuel and is creating additional
이게
upward pressure
유튜브를
on inflation.
틀어주면은 굉장히
And
느려지는 것 같아요.
COVID-19 related lockdowns in China are likely to exacerbate ongoing supply chain disruptions. Over the past year, inflation has also increased
안 눌렀어.
rapidly in many foreign economies, as discussed in a box in the June Monetary Policy Report. Overall economic activity edged down in the first quarter as unusually sharp in net exports more than offset continued strong underlying demand. Recent indicators suggest that real GDP growth has picked up this quarter, with consumption spending remaining strong.
예,
In
GDP가 많이
contrast, growth in business
확보되었고
fixed investment appears to be slowing, and activity in the housing
소비도
sector
많이
looks to be softening,
늘었고
in part reflecting higher mortgage rates. The tightening in financial conditions that we have seen in recent months should continue to temper growth and help bring demand into better balance with supply.
예, 경제
The labor
상황도
market has
지금
remained
뭐
extremely tight, with
괜찮다.
the unemployment rate near a
성장은
50-year
좀
low,
약간
job
둔화되긴
vacancies at
하지만
historic highs, and wage growth elevated. Over the past 3 months, employment rose by an average of 408,000 jobs per month, down from the average pace seen earlier in the year, but still robust. Improvements in labor market conditions have been widespread, including for workers at the lower end of the
예,
wage
노동시장은
distribution,
굉장히
as well
좋다고
as for
얘기를 하고
African Americans
있습니다.
and Hispanics. A box in the June Monetary Policy Report discusses developments in employment and earnings across all major demographic groups. Labor demand is very strong, while labor supply remains subdued.
예, 읽은 거 연설문 그대로 읽고 있습니다. 어제랑 큰 차이 없어요.
The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and price stability for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high and significant hardship, especially on those least able to meet the higher costs of
인플레이션이
essentials,
사람들의 삶에
food, housing, and
큰 뭐
transportation.
힘든 영향을 미치고
We're
있다. 그걸
highly
알고
attentive
있다.
to the risks that high inflation poses to both sides of our mandate and we're strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective.
예, 2% 인플레이션
Against the backdrop
목표로
of the rapidly
도달하기
evolving
위해서
economic
아주
environment,
열심히
our policy
하겠다,
has been adapted
약속한다
and will
그렇게 얘기를
continue to do
했습니다.
so. With inflation well above our longer run goal of 2% and an
인플레이션이
extremely tight labor
여전히
market,
장기
we
목표
raised
2%
the
이상
target range for the
올라가
federal funds rate
있지만
at each of our past 3 meetings, resulting in a 1.5 percentage point increase in the target range.
세 번 모임 동안
The committee
1.5%나
reiterated that it anticipates that
이자율을
ongoing
올렸다
increases
그래서
in the target range will be appropriate. In May, we announced plans for reducing the size of our balance sheet and shortly
대차대표
thereafter began
축소도
the
5월달에
process of
발표했다.
significantly reducing our securities holdings. Financial conditions have been tightening since last fall and have now tightened significantly, reflecting both policy actions that we have already taken and anticipated actions. Over coming months, we will be looking for compelling evidence that inflation is moving down, consistent with inflation returning to 2%.
인플레이션이 앞으로
We
낮아지는
anticipate
확실한
that ongoing
증거를
rate
지금
increases
찾고
will be
있다.
appropriate. The pace of those changes will continue to depend on the incoming data and the evolving outlook for the economy. We will make our decisions meeting by meeting, and we will continue to communicate our thinking as
앞으로
clearly as
있을
possible,
계속되는 모임에서
using our tools to bring
결정을 해
inflation back down to our
나가겠다.
2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Making appropriate monetary policy in this uncertain environment requires a recognition that the economy often evolves in unexpected ways. Inflation has obviously surprised to the upside over the
경제는
past
우리가 예상한 거랑
and further
다르게 움직일
surprises
수가
could be in
있다.
store. We therefore will need to be nimble in responding to incoming data
그러니까
and the evolving
빨리빨리
outlook.
변화하는 상황에
We will
대처를
strive to
하겠다.
avoid adding uncertainty in what is already an extraordinarily challenging and uncertain time.
계속해서
We're
변화하는
highly
경제
attentive to inflation risks
전망에
and determined to take the measures necessary
불확실성을 안
to restore
주기
price
위해서
stability.
노력을
The
하겠다.
American economy is very strong and well positioned to handle tighter monetary policy. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country.
사람들과 사업체에
Everything we
우리
do is in
결정이
service
많은
to our
영향을
public
미치는 걸
mission.
알고 있는데
We at the Fed will do everything we can to
우리가 할 수
achieve
있는
our
건 다
maximum
하겠다.
employment and price
그래서
stability
어제
goals.
상원에서 읽은 거랑 똑같은 걸
Thank you.
읽었습니다.
And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman Powell. Chair Powell, at your Senate confirmation hearing, you were asked about the possibility that inflation is being driven by corporations in concentrated sectors of the economy. You said, and I quote, "That could be right. It could also just be, though, the demand is incredibly strong and that, they're raising
수요가
prices because
강했고.
they can," quote, unquote. We're all seeing and
제시님
feeling the
할
effects of
때
inflation on consumer pocketbooks.
수요가
The
굉장히
corporate
좋았다.
profit margins are not hurting. In 2021, the profit margins of the S&P 500 index surpassed 12%, the highest profit margin on record.
S&P
And is
500이라는
expected to
기업
be even higher
실적이 그렇게
in
나쁘지
2020.
않을 것으로
Corporate
얘기했는데
greed and consolidation are driving higher and higher prices for consumers above and beyond any inflationary pressures. Just last quarter, Tyson Foods, which sells 1 out of every 5 pounds of meat sold in the United States, claimed that their higher prices are due to rising labor and
예,
freight
고기
costs.
파는 타이슨이라는
Yet, they still
회사에
managed to net an additional $500 million in quarterly profits. When it comes to rents, a corporate landlord recently remarked, and I quote, "We have an unprecedented
수익이
opportunity
거의
to really press rents on
0.5조
renewals
정도나
because the
떨어졌다고
country
얘기를
is highly
하죠.
occupied." And so, where are people going to go?
월세도 너무
We have a
올라갔다.
tremendous opportunity to press both on renewing leases for existing residents and to reset market rates, which we've reset numerous times, even this year, end of quote. This kind of blatant profiteering on the backs of hardworking families is simply outrageous.
일하는
Could you
사람들한테
elaborate
열심히 일을
on the
하더라도
role
그 사람들한테
that
영향을 너무 많이
corporations
미친다고
play
얘기를 하고
in setting
있습니다.
prices and how that is affecting inflationary pressures today? Would you also elaborate on what you meant when you said perhaps corporations are raising prices, quote, because they can?
Sure. So
되게 길게 적어와가지고
matters of
물어보는데
concentration in the economy represent a series of interesting questions that are largely not settled. For one thing, it is clear that our economy has become more concentrated, largely due to lower levels of formation of smaller businesses. That has happened. It is not at all
예,
clear
경제가
that there's a
한쪽으로
connection
치우친 건 어쩔 수 없다.
between a more concentrated economy and, for example, inflation. And of course, matters of corporate concentration are outside the jurisdiction of the Fed. We really
네,
those are for the
회사가
competition
어떤 쪽으로
authority and
집중을
really
하고
for us
이런
to
것들은
discuss.
연준에서 할 수 있는
In
영역
terms of
밖의 일이다
why
이렇게
prices
얘기하고
are
있습니다.
going up, I think a lot of it has been a lot of the places where prices have gone up quite a bit have been situations where supply is constrained and demand is very strong. And so take cars,
많은
for example.
분야에
Demand for
있어서
cars
공급은
went
잘
up
안
a great
되는데
deal.
수요가 너무 더
During the
강하기
pandemic,
때문에
people wanted
물가가
to ride
올라가는
in
거다.
cars rather than public transportation, and they wanted to move to the suburbs and things like that. Rates were low. The economy was stronger than people expected. But the companies couldn't really make more cars because they couldn't raise their output because of the lack of semiconductors. So when demand
예,
hits
반도체가 늦게
fixed supply,
부족하기
what
때문에
happens is
자동차 같은
prices go
경우에는
up
공급이
and
문제가
margins
있으면
went
더
up,
차를
right?
만들
So I
수는
think
없는 상황이다.
as the economy returns to normal, we would expect those margins to return to more normal levels.
경제가 다시 보통 상황으로
Well,
돌아오면은
Chairman
프라핏
Powell,
마진도
the
다시
example
올라갈
that I
거다.
gave of Tyson, who said their prices were rising because of labor and freight costs, and yet they managed to net an additional $500 million quarterly profits. That
I apologize. I'm having a hard time hearing your words. I'm sorry.
예, 뭐라 그런지 못 알아듣겠다
Okay,
그러는데 저도 알아듣기가 쉽지
the
않아요.
example that I gave of Tyson Foods,
예, 타이슨
and
회사죠.
the fact
고기
that they
만드는 회사.
said that their prices were rising due to labor and freight costs.
가격이
Yet they
올라가는 게
managed to
임금 비용이
net an
올라가고
additional $500 million
그래서-
in quarterly profits. How do you explain that?
그래서 5천억 정도 손해를 보고
I'm not
있다.
familiar with their profit and loss statement, but I will say, and again, there may be
회사
particular
수익
industries where there are competition issues. I
대표는
don't
잘
know
모르겠지만
that. It's really not our focus or our authority.
그러니까
But do you have
연준에서
the
지금 거기에
opportunity,
대해서 우리가 할 수 있는 건
to
없다.
look at rising costs and identify corporations where they are gaining substantial profits, yet they keep raising their prices. Do you have a way of examining that?
I think we can see that.
물가가
but I
올라가는데
think,
그거 조사할 수 있겠냐?
our job is to keep maximum employment and price stability. So we're not
우리는
in the
완전
business of
고용하고
regulating
가격
individual
안정에 지금
companies,
집중하는 거지.
or determining whether their
회사의
actions,
수익
for example, are anti-competitive or
수익이
that sort of thing.
나누고
That's
뭐 이런
more
거에
for
대해서 뭐
elected
경쟁력에
people and also
대해서는
for
우리가 할
the
수 있는 게
competition
없다.
authorities. So we do look at that, and
우리가
but
보긴
again, I think
하는데
a great deal of the price increases that you saw were a matter of supply being unable to meet demand, and the result was prices moving up. In many cases, that was the story.
지금 보고 있는
Thank you very
공급과
much. The
수요의
gentleman
문제
from North
때문이다.
Carolina, Mr. McHenry, who is the ranking member of the committee, is now recognized
Well,
for 5
thank
minutes.
you, Madam Chair. I would, on this debate about corporate profits, I would commend to the committee Secretary Yellen's statement where she rejects the idea of corporate greed is to blame for inflation, and I concur.
회사의 욕심이 인플레이션을 가져왔다.
We have a complex set of
거기에
issues.
대해서는 동의한다.
The fiscal house was certainly
아주
different
복잡한 많은
than
문제들이
monetary
있는데
policy. And the extraordinary nature of the partisan American $2 trillion injected into
예, 아까
recovery economy,
얘기했듯이
Democrat policies to keep people out of
2,000조짜리
the
부양안
workforce
때문에
for
지금
longer
문제가
to
되고
the
있습니다.
Western world also contributed to inflation. So that is a political debate here on Capitol Hill, Chairman Powell, and that is on the political side. What I want to ask you about are the policy tools that you are using. Now, certainly, you, as chair of the Fed and the Open Markets Committee, took extraordinary measures in the midst of the pandemic to ensure that we didn't have further contagion, and including extraordinary lending facilities, purchasing securities, keeping the federal funds rate at zero. These were the right tools at the right time. On the fiscal side, you had a partner to keep our economy afloat during government shutdowns.
2,000조 부양안하고 거의 0%에 가까웠던 금리
I want to
이런
talk to you
것들.
as you put these measures away, how you expect the economy to respond. So let's start here. What is your level of commitment to fight inflation?
인플레이션 어떻게 너 싸울래?
So it's unconditional. Our commitment is, and the reason is that
나의 약속은 조건
we
없는
need to, in a
거다.
particular situation, we have a labor market that's sort of unsustainably hot, and we're very far from our inflation target. We really need to restore price
노동시장이
stability, get
굉장히
inflation back down
좋다.
to 2%. Because without that, we're not going to be able to have a sustained period
노동시장이
of
좋기
maximum
때문에
employment, where the benefits are spread very widely and where people's
2%
wages aren't being
인플레이션에
eaten up by
도달하려고
inflation.
노력할 수 있는 거다.
Really, it's something that we need to do, we must do.
우리는
In order
인플레이션을 잡아야
to
된다.
have that kind of a labor market, we'll need to do it.
So as you pull back these
우리 그래야
emergency
된다.
measures from COVID, and so what they look like sort of in the long run, how do you expect the economy to respond?
So when we raise interest rates,
이자율을 올렸을
and
때
also to a lesser extent when the balance sheet shrinks, what happens is
대체 부족사-
rates go up across the economy and financial conditions generally tighten. And it's
예,
you can think of it as
그러면은 경제 상황이 좀
interest-sensitive
타이트해진다.
spending is an important place that'll be affected, and that's things like automobiles and other durable goods. Rates are
자동차든지
higher,
내구자라든지
then demand for cars will
이런 거에 대한 소비가
moderate,
줄어든다.
will decline a bit. The second channel would be asset prices generally. We don't target any
예.
particular asset prices, but higher interest rates tend to bring them down
예,
broadly.
자산
That
가치를
tends to
낮추려고
mean
노력할
a little
것이다.
bit less spending.
예, 소비를
Out
줄이고
of, because people's wealth has perhaps declined a little bit.
자산
And the
가치가
third
떨어지면
channel could
소비가
be the
줄겠죠.
exchange rate, where that also has disinflation effects. So overall,
예,
we have
이런 것들이 인플레이션을 낮출
effects
것이다.
on the economy. Our intent, of course, is to bring inflation down to 2% while preserving a strong
의도는
labor
결국엔
market.
인플레이션을
As I've
2%로
mentioned,
낮추려고
that has
하는
become
것이다.
significantly more challenging with the events of the past
굉장히
few
도전적이긴
months, particularly the
하지만
war, which is driving
지금
gas
우크라이나
prices up
전쟁이
and
있는
raising
지금
energy prices
상황에서
and also
가스
food
가격이 올라가기
prices
때문에 더
and
어렵다.
disrupting supply chains further.
So at the same time, you have a massive
공급 체인도
balance
문제가
sheet.
있다.
First, begin with mortgage-backed securities. As we have a roll-off of the
모기지백
Fed balance
시큐리티에
sheet
대해서 얘기해
of
보자.
mortgage-backed securities, what are expectations for how that affects housing?
So I think
그게
what
집
will affect
문제에 어떻게
housing is the
영향을 미칠
rate.
거냐.
The housing industry are slowing down.
모기지
From
채권이죠.
very,
이번에
very
모기지
high
채권도
pace.
풀립니다.
And that's partially because of higher mortgage rates. The effects of shrinking the balance sheet will be marginal compared to the effects that we're seeing and expect to continue to see from rates rising mortgage rates.
예,
But
모기지
what are your
이율은
expectations and
올라가고
any further announcements? Can we expect further announcements on the assets you hold and the securities you hold? Or are there going to be balance sheet announcements in the coming weeks?
No, I would say this. We have a plan. We've articulated it. The markets are forward-looking.
예,
They see
정부가
it.
들고 있는 썸머
The
어카운트에
markets
정부
are,
부채라든지
in a
모기지백
good place,
시큐리티
I
지금
think,
푸는 거는
understanding what
계획대로
we're
이제
gonna
풀릴
do,
거다
and
그렇게 얘기를 하고
We're
있습니다.
going to be allowing these securities to mature and run off our balance sheet at a pace
예,
that we've
만기가
set.
된 채권들만 이제 푸는
90
거다.
or 95 billion, I guess. It's about half of that.
네, 950억 달러를 풀죠.
That's what we've done, and we expect.
예,
The idea
9월부터
is that that'll
950억
just
달러
be
풀고
on an
지금은
ongoing basis
475억
in the
달러 풀고
background,
있죠.
and we think the markets can handle that.
예,
Treasury
예,
issuance
시장은 그거를 좀 이렇게 잘 받아들일 거라고 그렇게 생각하고
Treasury will
있습니다.
then reissue them in whatever form they think is a bit when it relates to treasuries. So
Thank you.
The gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, who is also the chair of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, it's good to see you. And I
만나서
know you'll hear a
반갑습니다.
lot of probably political stuff going back and forth.
예,
The
정치적인
American
문제가
public is
있다.
trying to understand the language of which we're talking about so that we can really
사람들은
understand
이
what inflation
어려운
is.
이 언어를
Fact of the
이해하려고
matter
노력한다.
is, I just recently was over in Europe. There's inflation in Europe, just like
유럽의
there's inflation
인플레이션,
here. Although, as I talked to
인플레이션
Christine
보고
Lagarde and others, they say the cause of the inflation may be
인플레이션
different.
원인은
The
다르다.
causes are different. They said that maybe demand, but not a case of demand there, is to resolve inflation in Europe. For example, I was in Moldova, 30% inflation rate, gas $15 a gallon.
몰도바의 인플레이션 비율이 30%나 올라가 있고
$13 a gallon.
예,
And I could name
기름값이
places
13불이고
in
갤런당.
from Europe to the United States. Is it that we had, whether it's the supply chains, the
유럽하고
China
미국,
shutdown, your complete shutdown, the zero COVID policy,
서플라이 문제가 있고
Russia's war in Ukraine,
예, 우크라이나 문제, 중국
COVID
문제.
period. isn't just a massive storm of everything is what contributes
예,
inflation
이
and causes
커다란
it
큰
all over the world.
폭풍이 이런 것들 다 합쳐가지고 지금 인플레이션을
It's a
가져왔냐고.
little bit of everything, right? So if I'm talking to my constituents, trying to explain to them what inflation is and what causes it, I would not single out any one thing. I would probably have to talk about the conglomerate of things because if you
예,
take away two or
전체적으로
three of those,
합쳐져서
we might not
인플레이션에
be in a
영향을 미친 것
situation
같다.
here. All of it unprecedented. All of it
모든
really out of the
것이 기존에 없던
control
거고.
of anyone. Out of control of Democrats, out of control of Republicans, out of
예,
control of the president, out
공화당이든
of control of other
민주당이든
governments.
통제할
Is
수
that
없는
not correct?
거다.
Some of
그렇게
it is out of our
생각하냐?
control. For example, the price of oil and most of the price of food. And to your point, Europe has much more. It's much more about energy and food prices. Very difficult problems. And
유럽은
also they, of course,
에너지하고
have
음식
the
문제가
Eastern
있다.
European Central Bank has different countries,
유럽
which,
중앙은행에
and so they have to worry about the difference, the
예,
spreads
나라마다의
between
차이를
different
조율하려고
countries, and
노력하고
that's a
있다.
different challenge that we don't have here.
근데
we have the
미국은
difference
그런
here
게
for
없다.
us is we actually have a very strong economy.
우리는 아주 좋은
and
경제를 가지고
well-recovered
있다.
economy, and so more
우리는
of
잘
our,
회복을 했다.
inflation is from demand, and we do have tools to deal with demand. That is the
이런
place where we
우리는
actually
그만큼
can
수요가
work. That's
살아
what we're
있고
using our
그거를
tools.
And some
통제할
of that was
만한
because
장치가
during
있다.
the crises that we had to do certain things, stimulus and other things to make sure that we kept our economy stable. I mean, without doing those things, we would have been in trouble. So the things that we did, going through COVID, the stimulus, trying to make sure people kept their jobs, kept money coming in at the time.
경제
was what we
안정화를
had
위해서
to
여러
do.
가지를
Otherwise,
했다.
we would have been in worse shape or not have as strong economy as we have now compared to other countries. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say it this way, that our inflation is a consequence of very strong demand, in part driven
우리의
by
인플레이션의 주 이유는 아주 큰 수요 때문이다. 아주 강한 수요 때문.
but also
But that helps
우리가
stabilize our
여태까지 또
economy at that
해왔던
time,
것
right?
때문이다.
it did.
And I do those things, our economy may not be as strong as it is right now.
우리가 그런 것들을 지난 2년간 안 했으면 지금 경제가 그렇게 강하지 못할
Let me jump to
것이다.
something else real quick, because the one other thing, I know you testified before the Senate yesterday, but a number of my constituents that I talked to was the question about can we resolve inflation without increasing unemployment? Because our
우리가
folks are concerned
인플레이션을
about
잡을 수
losing their
있겠냐,
jobs
실업률을
and not
올리지
being able to,
않고.
it'd be worse if they were unemployed. So my question to you is, can you speak to what the Fed has seen during the last few years with respect to the relationship between unemployment and inflation? And is
실업률하고
it possible that
인플레이션.
we can continue to have a strong labor market while also
강한
curbing
노동 시장을
inflation?
유지하면서 인플레이션을
It's
잡을 수
certainly
있겠냐?
possible that we can.
가능합니다.
And there is a relationship
우리 할 수
between,
있다.
between unemployment
관계가
and inflation.
있습니다.
The challenge now is that inflation is at a
도전적인
four-decade
거는
high.
인플레이션이 너무
Some of it we can
높다.
deal with,
40년
some of
동안
it
가장
is
높다.
really, going to be dealt with on global markets, the price of oil and that kind of thing. We can't affect those, but
예,
the challenge is
기름값이
we're
큰 문제고
tightening monetary policy, and that's
통화
designed
정책을 타이트하게
to
잡아가고 있다.
drive growth down to a level that's more
우리가
sustainable and
성장을
lower,
좀
give supply side a chance to
잡아가야지
catch up
인플레이션이
and give
잡힌다.
inflation a chance to come down and bring inflation down. That's what we're trying to do. We don't have precision tools, and
우리는 정확한 툴이 있는 건 아니다. 장치가 있진
affects the
않다.
whole economy through many channels, and so there is a risk that unemployment would move up. from what
위험이
is a
있다.
historically low
실업률이
level.
올라갈 수 있는
A
위험이
labor
있다.
market with 4.1% or 4.3% unemployment is still a very strong labor market. Today's rate is 3.6%,
예.
and there are two
실업률이
vacancies
4.1,
for every unemployed
4.3%까지
person.
올라가더라도
So that's a labor market
시장은
that's
좋을
kind
수
of
있다.
overheated.
Gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Chair Powell, thank you for joining us again today. I just want to start by saying how sick and tired I am
얼마나 피곤하고
of the
얼마나
president's
피곤하냐.
inflation blame game. One day it's Putin's fault, another it's the oil
인플레이션
companies
비난
and
게임.
or perhaps it's corporate
푸틴을
greed.
욕하고 중국을
Now we're
욕하고
blaming other countries like
예, 다른 나라를
Estonia,
비난하고
Turkey, Europe.
그래서
I give you
이거를 인플레이션
my
비난하는 게임이라고
avid
생각합니다.
assurance that no one in Missouri's 2nd Congressional District gives a rip what the price of gas and groceries are in Europe. They care about what they are at the corner of Manchester Road and Weidman. No one in this administration
미주리에
is
있는
willing
사람들은
to accept responsibility for the
책임을
dismal economic
받아들이라고
situation
얘기를 하고
America is in today.
있습니다.
Inflation, sir, more than tripled in 2021, from 1.4 to 7%.
1.4에서
And from June to
7%까지
the end
3배나
of
늘었다.
September 2021, inflation hovered, I think, around 5.4%, and then began a steady increase until reaching an historic 8.6%. That is now
5.4에서
crippling Americans' spending power
8.6%까지
today.
많이 올랐다.
Chair Powell, when inflation remains steady at 5.4% during that period in
5.4%의 인플레이션이 잘
2021,
유지돼 있을 때
what
2021년에
factored the Fed's decision to keep rates at nearly zero
왜 이자율을
during
계속
each
0.25%로
FOMC
0%
meeting
가까이
in
유지를
June,
했냐?
in July, and in September of 2021, sir?
So during the summer of 2021,
작년 여름이죠.
just giving us hindsight, inflation was coming down month by month.
인플레이션이 낮아지고
monthly
있었다.
readings for CPI or PCE, they were coming down
CPI든
month on month through
PCE든
September.
계속 내려오고
And
있었다.
so that I think told us that our thesis that this was going to be a passing inflation shock was at least plausible. I think that the data
그래서 인플레이션이 잘 지나갈 거라고 생각을 하고 있었다 작년 여름에는.
and we very much changed our position, and since then have
근데
tightened
그
financial
이후로
conditions quite significantly.
근데
So it was a
조건이
matter of a few
바뀌었다.
months when we were really looking at this and thinking it's going to be passing. Most macroeconomists thought that it would be
몇
a
달
passing
동안
thing.
인플레이션이
It
잡히고
turned out
있었기
to
때문에
not have
지나갈
been so
거라고
far, and
생각했다.
so
But we saw it move from 1.4% to 5.4%. So I don't, we did have a steady period of time. I wouldn't say that it was declining, but I'm just surprised that we weren't moving more quickly at the Fed. I mean, I want to be honest, sir, that the Fed, I think, underestimated actual inflation.
그때
What
너무
do you
과소평가
think
아니냐.
you missed?
Well, we did underestimate it. With the benefit of
우리는
hindsight,
과소평가하지
clearly we did.
않았다.
So it comes down to this judgment that we had to make. It has really nothing to do with our framework or anything like that. And every central bank had to make the same judgment, which was looking at the supply chain problems and labor force participation, millions of
노동
people
참여 문제라든지
out of the labor force. We had to decide whether that was going to be a lasting thing or whether it would kind of turn around quickly.
공급 문제라든지 노동 참여 이런 것들을 보면서 이런 것들이 지속될 건지 안 될 건지.
People will come back as soon as COVID is over. We have these new vaccines.
코로나가 나고 백신이 나오면서 인플레이션이 잡힐 거라고 생각을 했나 봐요.
Every American is going to get vaccinated. We'll be done with COVID by the end of the year. So basically, these supply side issues, broadly speaking, just didn't get better. They were recurring waves.
공급
That was
문제가
the judgment we had
더
to make.
좋아지지 않았다.
We knew it could be wrong, and I think when it started to look
우리가
pretty wrong,
잘못했을 수도
we
있다.
pivoted.
Now, President Biden continues.
7 months ago.
President Biden continues to say that a recession is not inevitable, as his government agencies,
바이든 대통령이
and Dems
리세션은
in
피할 수 있을
Congress
수도 있다
continue
얘기했다.
to spend billions and trillions of taxpayer dollars, burden businesses
계속해서
with
돈을 많이 쓰고
costly
있는데
rules
수조원씩.
and regulations, and on top of it, the president refuses to unleash American energy independence. The president's policies continue to take inflation taming
미국 에너지
options, I think, off the
독립
table and hamstring
법도 안
Fed's
통과시키려고
ability to
그러고.
focus on price stability. President Biden not only limits the energy production here in America and spends
에너지
trillions of our taxpayers' money,
생산을
but he
제한하고
also threatens tax increases
세금까지 올리려고 한다고 합니다.
How can you still say, sir, that the Fed has a pathway to a soft landing?
어떻게 페드가 소프트 랜딩을 이런 상황에서 할 수 있겠냐?
Our intention is to achieve inflation getting back to 2%. And, began in the latest rise from February.
The latest rise. This has been going on for a year and a half. I appreciate the chair's indulgence. I will yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Chairman Powell.
이러고 그냥 끝내버렸네요.
From Texas, Mr. Green, who is also the chair
시간이
of the
다 돼서
Subcommittee on
끝나버렸어.
Oversight and Investigations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Chair Powell. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to have a few thoughts with you, share some thoughts. In February of 2021, you indicated that millions of people were out of the labor force, which is what you've said today, millions.
2월 달에
And millions of
직업이
people out of the
잃었는데
labor force the Biden administration and persons on my side of the aisle sought to do something about that to help those who were unemployed.
실업자들을 어떻게 해서든 도와주려고
The
했는데
inflation that my colleagues speak of has to do with unemployment, the help that we gave people who were unemployed at the time. Persons who are unemployed, Mr. Chair,
실업자들을 도와주려고
they need
했던
help.
돈이 인플레이션을 가져왔죠.
They can't feed their families.
그들은 그들 가족을 먹여
Small
살릴 수가
businesses were
없다.
screaming for help.
이
We
소기업들은
helped
지금
small
도움을
businesses
요청하고
get
있다.
through a turbulent time. This was
아주
a
힘든
pandemic.
시간을 지내왔다.
The vaccines had to be distributed and developed.
백신을
That's a part
개발하고
of that
배포했어야 된다.
inflation that they're speaking of. People needed rental assistance.
렌탈
People were literally going to
비용도
be evicted by the millions,
도와줄 필요가 있었다.
but for the assistance from the Biden administration and Congress.
바이든 정부에서
We wanted
나온
people to
그런
go to work.
도움들이 이 사람들을 도왔다는 거죠.
We provided some child care. If you want people to go to work,
애들도
schools are
도와주었다.
closed. You got to help people through these turbulent times.
이 코로나 시기에 많은 사람들을
They
도와줬어야
never
된다.
talk about what the inflationary costs that they speak of
공화당은
really
인플레이션
did,
비용이
how
뭔지
it
잘 알지도
benefited
못한다 이러는
American
거죠.
people who are suffering.
고통받는
They
사람들에
overlooked that.
대해서는 얘기를 안 하고 있다.
They
공화당은.
weren't going to help, and now since they didn't help, they're going to say everything that they can to demean the help that was given.
어.
No, they didn't vote for it.
그래서 여태까지 줬던 그 돈들이 오히려 인플레이션을 야기했다고 비난만 하지 누구를 도와줬는지는 얘기
They
안 하고
have to
있다는
find a
얘기죠.
way to denounce the help. It's really shameful.
정말
It's
부끄러운
painful,
일이다.
and it's sinful to hear people use a term inflation to
인플레이션은
indicate that people who are unemployed shouldn't receive help. The small businesses
그동안
that were begging
도와줬던
for help
것들,
shouldn't have been
그리고
helped.
속인 것들,
Vaccines
백신
shouldn't have been
만들었던
distributed.
것들,
People shouldn't have gotten rental assistance. They shouldn't get child care.
예, 월세 도움 받았던
I would
것들.
respect them if they would say these things. That these are things that they opposed. But they're not going to do that. They use one word, inflation. And unfortunately, messaging to all of the American people has been somewhat lacking. But I want the people that I serve who pay attention to the
바이든 정부를
supermarket more so
옹호하는 것
than the
같아요.
stock
민주당
market,
쪽 사람이라서.
to know that when they needed this help, we were there for them. And Mr. Powell, you indicated that there were millions of people out of work in February of last year, just prior to this help being accorded people.
수백만 명이 일자리를
commentary.
잃었다. 2월에 작년 2월에. 그거
Sorry,
굉장히
I
중요해요.
welcome your commentary.
You welcome my comment. Sorry, I didn't catch that
코멘트
part.
달라는 거
So,
질문을 안 했네요.
You know, our job is maximum employment and price stability. We did what we did during the pandemic. Acute
우리의
phase in response, and
역할은
we did what we
완전
did.
고용과
And
가격
now we are
안정이다.
where we are, and so we have a job to do. And,
우리가 해야 할 일을
it's very
했다.
important that we do it, not least because of the people you talk about. That they're down to 2%, and help those people.
인플레이션
is by trying
2%를
to get demand and
떨어뜨리면은
supply
정말
back in balance.
그 약한 사람들을 많이 도와줄 수 있을 거라고
something
믿는
that I find favor with. You said we did what we had to do. We did what we had to do. We did what we had to do.
우리가 해야 할 일을 했다.
We adults in the room
우리가
who
이
did what
방의
had to be
성인들이다.
who declined to do can now be
다른
critical.
사람이 안 하려고 그랬던 걸 우리가 해야 할 일을 했다.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Minnesota.
결국 뭐 질문 안 하고 자기가 할 말 다 하고
is now
끝냈습니다.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Waters. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you, Chair Powell, for your testimony and your time here today. Financial freedom is American freedom, and frankly, Americans do not
경제적
have the
자유가 미국
financial and
사람들의
economic
자유다.
freedom they need to invest in themselves, their businesses, and their
투자
families. Unfortunately,
하고
Americans are too
비즈니스에
busy
투자.
making ends meet to focus on
근데
anything else.
지금
inflation
살기가 되게
is
힘들다.
running rampant across the United States,
인플레이션이
with
너무
consumer
심각하다,
prices
지금.
rising 8.6% in the past year, the
8.6%나
largest price
올랐다.
increase since 1981. From fuel to meat to housing,
이런
all
일을 가장
Americans
높다.
are suffering at the hands of this
모든
hidden
미국
tax.
사람들이 지금 너무
Except it's not
힘들어하고
so
있다.
hidden
인플레이션이
anymore.
높아서.
It's punching Americans in the face, as my friend Mr. Style put it yesterday. So, how did we get here? It's pretty simple.
얼굴에
We
그냥
gave up
펀치를
American
때리는 것
energy
같다.
independence. We locked down our citizens and businesses for nearly 2 years, pumped the economy with well over $5 trillion in what's called stimulus funds.
2년 동안
And
사람들을
now, as we recover
가다놨고
from the
5천억
pandemic,
정도
we simply
썼고
do not have the energy
5
resources
trillion, 5천조
necessary
정도 썼고
to meet the increased consumer demand. There's a history of Democrat policies we can point to that put us in this position. From refusing to adopt an all-of-the-above energy strategy to recklessly passing $2 trillion in partisan spending through the
민주당이
American
에너지
Rescue
정책을
Plan,
다
despite the fact that
통과시키는데
nearly $1
실패해왔다.
trillion of bipartisan relief was unspent. But the bottom line is we need solutions now because inflation is beating up the American
인플레이션이
people.
너무
We
심각하기
have to
때문에
wake up
지금
and
해결책이
realize that we
필요하다.
cannot continue these spend-your-way-to-prosperity policies. Everyday inflation threatens the
경제
financial
번영을
security of
위한
American
것만
families,
자꾸
of our
강조하지
constituents.
말고
We need solutions.
우리는
Let me just
해결책이
return to my
필요하다.
point about the spending. In December 2020, we'd authorized nearly $4 trillion in bipartisan COVID. Yet just 3 months later, Democrats pushed through another $1.9 trillion with hardly any oversight
공화당에서는
mechanism
적게
included, even though
부양안을 냈는데
a
민주당에서 계속해서
all COVID
올렸다고
relief
얘기를 하고
remained
있습니다.
unspent. When President Biden was recently asked if the $1.9 trillion spending bill caused inflation,
최근에
he said he
바이든이
didn't think the bill had even a minor impact
$1.9
and
trillion
called the idea,
달러짜리도
quote,
통과시켰다.
bizarre.
1900조
Chair
정도죠.
Powell, do you agree with the president's conclusion that the $1.9 trillion American that was included in the American so-called rescue plan had not even a minor impact on the inflation we're seeing today?
I'm sorry, I wouldn't comment on what any elected official said, and it's really not up to us to score fiscal interventions.
예,
Again,
재정
sir,
정책에
if
대해서
you
언급하기를
would,
거부했습니다.
respectfully, I'm not asking you to comment on what the president said. I'm asking you personally. Do you believe that the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan did not even have a minor impact on the inflation we're seeing today?
1900조짜리 레스큐 회복 계획이 인플레이션에 영향을 안 미칠 거라 생각합니다.
It's interesting, sir. It's interesting, sir.
우리는
that you won't
세금
comment on this, but you were
줄이고
more
이런
than
거에
willing
대해서
a year ago
언급하고
to
싶지
talk
않아.
about inflation as some transitory something that everyone has acknowledged now. It's going to be here for a while. Even though it seems like the president's Build Back Better package, this massive spending package, is dead on arrival, certain elements might not be dead. Chair Powell, do you have concerns that if Congress injects a new round of stimulus into the current economy, it could, and in fact will, add to the inflation we're seeing today?
Again,
자, 그래서 지금 의회 부양안을 내놓으면 인플레이션 영향을 안 미치.
Our mandate and our mission.
지금 대답을 거부하고
we have a lot of work
있습니다.
to do on that front, and not really giving you advice on what you should be doing. We take fiscal policy as something that comes to us, and we deal with it as part of everything else.
I'm very disappointed, sir.
재정 정책이 오면은 뭐 여러 많은 데이터 중에 하나로 그냥 참고할 뿐이다 그렇게 얘기하고 있습니다.
Interest rates because that's the only tool you think you have left. This is not just a dog chasing its tail anymore, sir. This is a dog that's starting to devour its tail and its back end because of the debt that we are carrying. I want to thank you. You acknowledge we're in a bad spot. We're knowingly walking toward an even worse inflation, a recession, and God forbid,
인플레이션 너무
food shortages.
심각하다
Yet we're
자꾸 그거
relying on
강조하고
old
있습니다.
monetary
굉장히 정치적인
policy
발언만
tools
계속하는
to keep
것
us from
같아요.
falling off a cliff. Sure, we can raise interest rates over and over, but the only way to curb in a disaster this bad is to raise interest rates to a catastrophic level